Good afternoon, friends. We are back to Karateng, spending the afternoon. It's actually mid morning with family, and today we are mostly going to be focusing on yard work and some cleaning here and there. And as the title suggests, today we are going to focus on construction 101 for women, especially women who are thinking about constructing projects in the village. Now, the dream to own a home is one that all returnees and people who live in other places, especially the cities, share in common. It doesn't matter if you live in diaspora or if you live in Nairobi. Most of us desire to own a place that we can call our own. Really, nobody wants to depend on a landlord or family member or other people to satisfy this very basic need for shelter. And so the pathway to home ownership for many returnees and other folks who live in cities can take all kinds of trajectories depending on a number of factors that are kind of related. And I'm going to highlight about 6 as we start this conversation. The first factor, of course, is family background. There are many folks who are born and inherit land, homes, networks, and things like that. I know many women or men who are born and their family gift them land or just give them homes that are fully built. While the vast majority of people in my network don't inherit much, virtually start from zero, besides a few of us who inherited land. But that family background is often the first factor to think about. Then, of course, the more obvious one is the socioeconomic status of an individual, whether you're talking about finances, how much savings you have, and things like that. Or when you talk about community assigned titles, like being a pastor's wife or being a head teacher, some of those titles can go a long way in the world of construction, especially if you are a woman constructing in the village. Now, the existing networks can also play a role. There are some people who have connections with experts within the construction field. Some women I know actually own construction companies, and so they are often vastly ahead of those who are really new to the field. There are also women who have a privilege to have men within the circles, especially men who are informed about issues of construction. And I'll explain how that becomes important in the next couple of minutes. And then, of course, women who have access to loans and other forms of finances often start a few steps ahead of everybody else. Now, as I said earlier, some women have amazing experience with construction. Those who own construction companies or those who are contractors, some of them are engineers who know a whole lot, and they're women that we really learn a lot from currently. Now, the other factor that you cannot forget about is the issue of culture and social identities that I'm going to focus on in this video. So most of this video will really circle around cultural issues that can limit or enhance a woman's capacity to be successful in moving to the village. And I'll also talk about social identities such as gender, birth order, age, and other forms of socially defined identities that really may influence whether or not a person is able to build successfully in the village. So in today's video, just to give you a quick run, I'm going to talk about 5 things. Number 1, I'm going to examine the contextual factors that affect women living in cities and diaspora who desire to build structures at home, especially structures that are meant to be lifelong places of living. Of course, people can build all sorts of structures, whether it's a rental property, B&B, and things like that. But this discussion is going to focus on people who are building what we can describe as retirement property. And then I'm going to explore a number of cultural variables that often affect women. Then number 3, I'll talk about identity-related limitations. That's where issues such as birth order, gender, age, and all that come in. And of course, all these factors are interrelated. They're not necessarily exclusive from each other. And then towards the end of the video, or somewhere in the middle, I'm going to share my plug for those who have done my wainscoting, gypsum work, painting, and scheming. I've worked with some amazing folks, and one of the most asked questions is the contacts for people who have worked in some of the projects I'm involved in. So I'm going to share the context somewhere in between. And then in the end, as I've always done with all my videos, I'm going to offer suggestions that I think may work. So as we always do, there are limitations to what I'm going to share. Remember, my stories are very limited to my experience. And so it's highly likely that what I'm going to describe may not be anywhere close to your personal experience. But if it is similar to yours, feel free to share your experience. I'd like to learn from you, or just compare notes between my stories and your stories. Feel free to share your stories in the comment section. Now, most of what I'm going to talk about also is about the women in my life. Many of them are very strong African women who, despite all kinds of obstacles, are wildly successful, not just in their personal life, but also around construction. So I've learned quite a lot from the women who are doing amazing work. Many of them I'm actually going to feature their homes in the next couple of videos. Now, some of the women whose stories I'm going to present here are married women who live with great men who have raised really good families. A few of my friends live with men who have challenges beyond what would be considered average. And I'm not talking about marital issues. That's not what I shine in. I'm talking about men who still struggle with the cultural issues that make life difficult for women, or men who feel threatened by the success of women, or just folks who have ego issues that they offload on their women. Then there's this group of women whose stories that I'll share. Many of them are single and very successful. In fact, literally every single woman that I know in my circle as friend or family has been very successful. And then the last group of women whose stories I'm going to share are also generally women from the western part of Kenya. And by western part of Kenya, I'm talking about women from Kisii, from Luo Nyanza, from the western province, and parts of Rift Valley. I'm connected with a lot of women from that part of the world, and many of them are the stories that I'm learning from that I will share in today's video. So circling back to contextual factors that affect women who desire to build in the village. The first one is marital status. Of course, there's a term in my mother tongue called migogo. It's not a very pleasant term, but it's often used to describe unmarried women. Women who are not married in some of the cultures I've talked about may have challenges with, first of all, where they're allowed to build their homes. Many are actually not even allowed to use ancestral land to build homes, or even to inherit property. So while the Kenyan law absolutely allows women to inherit ancestral land, the reality can be very different on the ground. And this gets even worse, particularly when a woman is unmarried, especially if she's unmarried and she does not have a lot of finances. Usually, single women who have money can get away with a whole lot more than single women whose finances are tight. Now, age is also a factor here. Younger women tend to, unfortunately, have less control over what they're going to do in terms of finances and building. And the control often comes from spouses or parents. So in many cases, when they're doing projects, I've seen the women in real life having to work through their parents and sort of like getting permission as a factor of age. So younger women have that challenge that may not be as big of a deal for older women. And by older women, I'm talking about middle-aged women. Now, birth order also is an important factor here. Women who are older, and this may also be true to men as well, tend to have a whole lot more responsibilities besides building. And so a firstborn, for example, may start preparing to build, start putting on materials, and then other family responsibilities like school fees, elder care, and all that come in. These women will always be pressured to stop their construction project to focus on taking care of other siblings. That can really influence their capacity to complete a project. And then the status of a person's sibling also matters. So if a woman is younger and single and has the financial means, yet her older siblings, probably married, may not have the financial means, in that scenario, the younger single woman may be pressured to begin by helping the older siblings first before they can build theirs. And so some of the women in my life have often been pressured to take their own money to help their older siblings build their property before they can build theirs. And so the status of one's siblings may be important in some families. Certainly, this is not true in all cases, but these are just my friends and the people around me. Now, where you live also matters. Women who live in Nairobi probably have closer ties to home and are able to travel back and forth compared to diaspora women who rarely come back. So that matters as well. Now, other cultural variables that play an important role in this conversation has to do with the gender of other siblings. For example, I knew a person in my life who was an older sibling, female, and has younger siblings that are male. So the older female buys property with the support of the family, only to find out that the family took the property and put all the property under the names of the younger brothers. And so this young woman worked for years, bought property. At the end of the day, could not own anything because everything was written under the brothers' names. And so gender here can be absolutely problematic for some women. And then, of course, there are also cultural limitations about the place of a woman. Construction definitely is a very male-dominated world for the most part. And so oftentimes men have very low expectations of women and give very little respect to women. And that's why sometimes they simply disregard what a woman says. Now, religion has also been used in some cases to limit women. We may not have the time to explore that today, but we will talk about that in another video. And then in some of our communities, not all, there are certain cultural rituals that come in handy for men, but these rituals really affect women negatively. For example, in some of our villages, a woman who is a widow is not allowed to build a home in the village if she's not inherited. So often these women are pressured to find a man to inherit them so they can build their own homes. In other cases, there are cultural restrictions as to who gets to start or get the ball rolling. So in many homes, a woman cannot just start delivering construction material in their village home. So some of the women in my life often deliver materials and then they report that they were sent by their husbands. So it's not fun, but those are some of the things women do to get around those cultural limitations. And women who don't follow this rule are often threatened by the possibility of death through some magical powers or isolation. In fact, a good example is my wife and I. When we built our home, we really broke so many cultural rules. I'll talk about this in another video. And because we did that, we have family members who will not set foot in our home because we did not follow like almost 4 different rules we're supposed to follow before building a home. So the threat of isolation is real for many folks who are thinking about building in the village. And then, of course, when you think about environmental conditioning, many young women in my world grew up playing with dolls while we, the boys, were building homes. I grew up, I was actually born in a grass-thatched madhouse in the village. That's where my parents lived. In that home, we watched men doing the building, and then women were doing the quote-unquote finishes with cow dung. So the gender roles were very clearly separated when we were kids. And I never saw any woman in construction. So this affects both the women and men in that sense that women don't see themselves as power brokers in the construction industry, while the men simply grow up thinking we are the it. So it's very easy for a man who grew up in that environment to simply disregard women. In fact, one of the contractors on my site, at one point, I heard him talking to my neighbor, and this is a single woman building a home. This contractor was asking the neighbor to go call her husband so they could begin the conversation. These things happen quite a bit. As I promised earlier, I said I was going to share a plug for wainscoting, gypsum, painting works, and scheming. I have this gentleman called Peter. He is amazing, and his phone number is, let me start with the country code, +254 704 532 482. Again, this is Peter. You can call him for wainscoting, gypsum works, painting, and scheming. His number is +254 704 532 482. So here's some suggestions that I would offer to women thinking about completing construction projects in the village. Number 1, save your money where only you can have access, especially where there are power issues between you and your better other. especially when you live with a person who does not respect your decisions. Be sure to have some significant degree of control over your finances. And then, secondly, sometimes, unfortunately, women have to really establish who the boss is by being very firm with men. I know it's exhausting, it's not fun, but sometimes that is what you have to do to really get the other men to understand that they have to take you seriously, just as they do with other men. Also, as a woman, feel free to hire other women. This is relatively uncommon. The women in my life have actually introduced me to this fact that some of them specifically just look for women contractors who don't bring all the other baggage that we introduce in construction as men. So yes, feel free to hire other women in construction. Now, I also suggest that sometimes it's okay to work with male proxies, and I'll explain that later on, especially when you're pressed with time. In terms of land, I recommend you buy land. The land that is bought comes with very few strings compared to ancestral land that has all kinds of cultural ties. Now, as a woman too, don't be afraid to be a trailblazer. Be the first to do something that no one else has done. You do it out there, and then you open up all kinds of doors for people behind you. I can't tell you how many folks behind me are free to do things in my home, things that were not possible before we broke some of the rules. So don't be afraid to be a trailblazer. And of course, don't worry about superstition. The idea of spirits killing people, I think those spirits are now old and retired. So don't worry about that. Now, while this is not required, I often say it's okay to keep a male figure, male friend or brother, or a significant other who may come in and do what sometimes needs to be done. Because unfortunately, the world we live in is not perfect yet. So it's okay to work with a male figure that is close to you who can help. Mentor other women. Please share your stories, because those stories are very powerful. And of course, feel free to hire professionals, whether it's legal advice, technical advice, and things like that. Again, I hope this was informative. If it was, feel free to hit the subscribe button. Thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next. Bye.